Welcome to the Revelation of Hope podcast with your host, Alvin Bonds II. Join us each week as Alvin explores the relationship between leadership and families by interviewing leaders in different fields all over the world. Alvin believes that the success of tomorrow's leaders begins with the success of today's families.
Hello, and welcome to the Revelation of Hope podcast. I am your host, Alvin Bonds II, and welcome to episode 11. Today, I interview David Bell, but before I get to that interview, I'd like to talk just a moment about individual development or personal development. You'll hear from David's interview how important it is for him to continue to develop himself personally. And personal development, it can be different things. Specifically in David's interview, he talks about how he recognized he needed some additional tools, additional skills, just needed to hone in on some things that he lacked, or he needed to sharpen some of his skills. And so David allowed himself to be trained and be teachable, and it paid off. Literally, it helped him advance in his career and the company that he's in. It also helped him in his family. So I invite you to reflect on what are you doing to better yourself. Perhaps listening to this podcast is one step you're doing to better yourself. But what can we do to continue to develop ourselves? It's important to be present and to appreciate the things that we have. But it is also important equally to make sure that we are doing things to better ourselves from yesterday. How do you know when things need to be sharpened? How do you know when you need additional skills, or you need additional training, or you need additional support in different areas? One of the things David mentions in his interview is he discovered there was something he was doing with his family that he needed to change. And so David took the necessary steps to make that change. But how do you know when those steps are needed? How do you know when you need additional knowledge regarding your job or your field? How do you know when you need additional support for your marriage? How do you know you need additional help or support for raising your children? How do you know when you need support just for being an individual? That's one of the things that David mentions in his interview today. So as you listen, I invite you to reflect on your own life and what you can do to continue to develop and to grow. Today, I interview David Bell. David is the CEO of USA Mobile Drug Testing, located in Tampa, Florida. The headquarters is in Tampa, Florida, but David's company provides services all over the United States. In David's previous position as the Vice President of Sales and Marketing, he doubled the company's revenue by helping franchisees leverage technology to increase sales and improve customer service. David is also married and has 6 children, 5 of whom are under the age of 12. So David definitely understands the importance of work-life balance. Here's my interview with David Bell. Well, welcome, David, to the podcast. Tell us what you do.
So I'm the CEO of USA Mobile Drug Testing headquarters here at Tampa, Florida.
What all do you do in that role? Because I understand you've been in this role for a couple of years now. How did that happen?
So I actually started a printing and marketing company back it's hard to remember all of the dates, so I apologize, but in the mid-2000s, ran that company for about 6.5 years, and this company was a customer of mine. I met the owners in the early stages of franchising the business, and decided to move on and sell my company and look for a new career. Printing's kind of a dying market, nothing's being printed on paper like it used to be, as you know.
Yeah.
Especially with like this type of news podcast. So kind of saw the writing on the wall, was kind of planning for the future, and decided to kind of look at my options. And the owner of the company, the founder, said, "Why don't you come work here?" And ended up working with the company for a little while, and worked my way into partnering in the company. Now I'm the CEO, and I run the business. I'm responsible for all the franchisees and what they do in their businesses locally, as well as we do drug testing in several cities across the nation, out of the headquarters office as well. So kind of got a lot going on, as you can imagine.
Yeah, that's pretty phenomenal that you work yourself up. And it sounds like you've been sort of an entrepreneur kind of leader before this position. Can you tell me a little bit more about some leadership positions that you've had?
Yeah, so, I think the entrepreneur spirit, started early. My father owned a cabinet company building cabinets for, hospitals and homes and, different types of furniture for my whole life. And so being around an entrepreneur kind of, naturally progressed for me as I got into the workforce, early. I looked at what options do I have, and I worked as a manager for a large printing firm for several years, and just decided it was time to step out on my own and take on entrepreneurship. So it's sometimes difficult starting from the bottom with not many means and working your way up. I literally started my printing company in my garage.
Wow.
So it's kind of one of those stories.
Well, Steve Jobs also started in his garage as well. So there's hope for all of us.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, not quite there, but yeah, I understand. It's funny.
Tell me some of the struggles or, obstacles you've encountered in your role as CEO.
Some of the challenges in this particular position is just understanding the dynamics of franchising.
Sure.
I know you speak a lot about the dynamics of having enough time and family, and those have definitely been some challenges over the years. Owning a business is being the one responsible for payroll, being the one responsible for HR, being the one responsible for everything, at the top of the company, regardless of how many employees you have below you. The ball rolls uphill, right? Yeah. And you have to make those decisions and make sure all the families that are connected with you get paid. So that's something that I think many business owners are always concerned about, always worried about. But I find that the risk was worth it, and the reward is worth it. I've really spent a lot of time focusing on my work-home life balance.
Yeah.
Making sure, I didn't really say in the introduction, but I have 6 children. So as you can imagine, that's a lot to keep up with from a family life perspective.
Yeah.
5 of them are still at home under the age of 12. So finding time to be with them and their extracurricular activities just means you really have to be organized, dedicated, and when you're at work.
Yeah.
When you're at home, be at home.
Wow. A family with 6 kids, you're definitely constantly busy and managing a business and a family. That's a lot. How did you mention balance? How do you find that balance? What has been some of the struggles that you have overcome to create that balance for you?
Honestly, in 2000, and I guess it would have been 2010, running a business, things were going quite well. We were really busy, and there wasn't a balance. I was working, 12 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week, just to keep up with the demand. And, that puts a stress and a toll on our family. And just kind of got to the point that I realized if I didn't take some action to figure out how to balance things out and reprioritize my life, that I was going to get to lose my, family life. And so I wasn't willing to let that go. Did some praying about it. I did some, coursework with an organization that really helped me look at my effectiveness in communication and communicating with people, and really just kind of relating to what is it like to be a human being, right? And how do we connect with people, especially my wife and my children,
yeah.
and put in some structure communication. I find that with communication, anything's possible. If you're effectively communicating what you plan to do, and then actually having some integrity and doing what you say you're going to do, it makes a huge difference. And then, it took a lot of practice. It didn't just happen because we just said, "Hey, I want to do this." We went through the motions and had some success, had some failures, and we worked it out. And we still work it out. It's always ongoing.
Sure.
Every time you start a new school year or a new phase at church, there's all kinds of stuff going on, and new career advancements, new opportunities with new customers, all kinds of things like that come in and change what is already a fairly well-working system. So it's just organic. You don't just set it in place and kind of leave it and forget it.
Yeah. And I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I have the pleasure of working with different family makeups and structures. And one of the things I see consistently is how important family is. Mother and father, or however the setup is for family to be present. And it's very encouraging to hear you acknowledge how important your family was, and for you to even take classes or seek spiritual guidance. That's amazing. What informed that type of, I guess, priority for you in your life?
Well, usually, it's pretty funny. You probably talk to a lot of people. What creates a priority is usually a crisis.
That's true.
So I heard you laugh. So that's kind of what happens. And, I just got to the point in my business, things were overwhelming, in my business manager, my coach that I had, kind of a coach trainer, just like you would for your personal trainer.
Yeah.
And, he looked at my constant complaint and said, "Hey, I think you should check this program out." And it was, I went to the program originally because I was challenged with some business circumstances, and what I got out of the program was really a reorganization of my priorities and a commitment to my family.
Yeah.
So, being open and willing to adapt and change is really important, and so that opened my eyes up to where I had struggles, and so it made a difference.
And you mentioned your father as he was an entrepreneur. What, I guess, leadership philosophy have you adopted, or do you have?
We grew up kind of a modest family. We didn't have, a great financial background, but my dad was a hard worker. And in his business, what it enabled him to do for us was he was able to make sure he was our baseball coach, our soccer coach. He was able to be there when we needed him to in the afternoons and the weekends, and at the same time still provide for the family. And so watching him be there for us and other kids as a coach really instilled some values into us, my brother and I, as we were growing up. And I just thought that when I got in the workforce and I was a manager for other people, they sometimes put a demand on you.
Yeah.
And I noticed how you didn't have the flexibility. You kind of had to go when and where they said and how they said to go. So that was something that I thought entrepreneurship would give me some flexibility. And to be honest, I realized pretty quickly that that's not the reality. You could ask my wife on Monday if I've done a great job, and she would say so. And Tuesday, she might tell you I did a bad job. So it's up and down. As I said, it's very fluid, and I think a lot of it has to do with constant communication with your spouse. Without a very, very strong wife, I don't think that I would be great in my business. Having somebody there to back me up emotionally as well as in the business. So that's a key part of any dynamic of a successful leader, I think, is having a strong partner.
Tell me about your relationship with your wife. And I imagine when you mentioned this time where you experienced a crisis, I imagine that there was some ebb and flow in y'all's relationship. How have y'all navigated those waters?
I'm sure we did, like a lot of people. There was lots of arguments and lots of ups and downs. I think for us, we have a very strong faith. We're Christians, and in our faith, we realize that when you get married, we're committed, and it's a lifelong commitment. And having that as a foundation for us made a huge difference because, when we went through those struggles or we had an argument that seemed like it was, just blowing up, sometimes over nothing important, but when you're in the moment, it kind of creates a foundation of, look, this is just one small situation, or even if it's a series of small situations, it's temporary. A relationship's forever. So having that foundation made a big difference, and it did take several years. It wasn't overnight. Just kind of continuing to go back and pray and work together to create a foundation of communication.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And interestingly enough, randomly I chose the people for this podcast, and almost everyone that I've spoken with identify their religious beliefs as an anchor for them and has led them and guide them. And I think that's phenomenal. I'm a Christian myself, so it's refreshing and encouraging, but also just allows us to see that we're all connected, even in our struggles, but also in our faith beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously, you can imagine in this country there's a large Christian following, and whether you're Christian or whether you have another religion, I think most of them, as a human being, we have kind of a general foundation of general beliefs, right? Yeah. Morally guided by the same compass per se, and so marriage is one of those that is kind of consistent across the basis.
Yeah. And I'm curious to know what leadership looks like for you with your family at home.
So I'm looked upon, not to turn this into a religious conversation, but I'm the spiritual leader of our home. So The first thing that I have to do is walk the walk. I find, if I'm being a hypocrite in the things that I tell my children to do, and then I turn around and do the opposite, children don't learn by do as I say. They learn by watching you do what you say.
Yeah.
And that makes all the difference in the world, both from a religious perspective and as just a general parenting structure about, your chores, sleeping, keeping the house clean, eating healthy, all of the things that you would expect. It starts and ends with the father in most cases. As a therapist, you could probably attest to that.
Yes. And interesting enough, I spoke to a principal at a school this morning, and she asked me to come speak to the students. And most of the students that she identified have a broken family, and the fathers aren't present. So it's really encouraging to hear your story and to know that you're there for your family, but also you're there as a representative of Christ. And that's why I do what I do personally, but also with this podcast, is to get the awareness out so that people understand how important family is. How are you seeing, I guess, with your children, are you seeing leadership spring up from them, or what influence are you having on your children?
Yeah, I see each of their personalities. The youngest is 4, his brother is 6, their sister is going to be 9 next week. Then the next 2 brothers are 10 and 12. And as they've grown up through the house, I've seen how the older ones help take care of the younger ones, how they provide some examples, sometimes bad examples, but, I see how they all pitch in for each other. I mean, we have there's a clear distinction, I think, from having a 1 or 2 child home versus 4 or 5 or above.
That's true.
The dynamically different, right? So their relationships, I think, are really strong because my wife and I have a strong relationship. So they get to see the love, the connection, the communication between us, and therefore kind of reciprocate that amongst each other. And then outwardly, out in their community with their friends, they tend to care. They put in an effort. They speak up and want to pray. My 6-year-old Nicholas, sees something going on and he just says, "Hey, I want to pray for them." So, they have empathy and they are encouraged to support each other. It's funny, actually, yesterday we sat down and had a family conversation last night and realized that, recently we've been focused on the negative. You can't do this because maybe you're just not smart enough or challenged, and maybe you're doing this, and so I noticed that we were, as a culture in our family, kind of focused on the negative. And I said, look, we can change that. This is our life, between the seven of us in the home. What we do, what we choose to be when we wake up in the morning, happy or grumpy, that's what it's going to be like for us for the day, and we impact each other. So I said, how about we start looking at a daily basis and focusing on the positive. What gifts have God given you? What are your talents? And vice versa between your brothers and sisters. And let's encourage. Let's talk about those strengths. And there's nothing wrong with identifying being weak at something or a lack of a talent. Identifying it's different than putting someone down by saying it. So It's okay to identify a challenge. It's how you grow.
And that is a struggle that many people have, and that's something that, as a therapist, I am constantly reframing and getting people to look at a different perspective. So I'm glad to hear that. How did you come to that realization? Because most people don't realize when they're stuck in that negative mindset. How did you realize that?
Actually, it's not rocket science. As I mentioned earlier, that I had done some coursework for myself. I happened to be at a weekend-long retreat for men this weekend at our church, and one of the men was sharing his personal testimony and his walk in Christ based on a particular theme. We had a group of guys doing different talks, and listening to them express what their challenges were and how they handle them in their family, actually was able to look inwardly at how I'm handling it or what we're doing, and through that exploration, identify that was one of the things that we did. So I think the key here is that I've taken the time to self-identify, and that's what's needed. Instead of sitting all weekend on the couch watching TV, I've spent some time doing some inward thinking, and by looking at others, and then it helped me just identify that. I mean, it wasn't part of the course; it didn't kind of get pointed out to me. It was just literally something identified when someone was sharing.
And I appreciate your feedback on that. There are some men who don't know how to do that, and for whatever reason. For me personally, my father wasn't present in my life when I was a child, but my pastor kind of took me under my wing, so he's kind of been like a father to me, and it's taught me, more than my biological father did. But many people don't have that opportunity to learn, and so it truly takes a village to work with the children, but I also want to work with the families as well. What would you say to encourage the men to be present and available for their families?
I would say courage. Just simply have to be willing and to step out of your comfort zone and ask questions. When someone's offering an opportunity to attend an event at church, whether it's an hour, 2 hours, or a weekend, take the opportunity. Don't be afraid to admit that I have a challenge, that I'm struggling, that it didn't go the way I wanted to. The last few years have been tough. You'll find, I think you said it very, very eloquently, is that it takes a village. It does absolutely, hands down, it takes a community. And the only way a community works is by getting out there and being a part of your community. So wherever you're at, through the school system, through fathers organizations, there's lots of great national organizations like All Pro Dads, which is put on throughout the country at the stadiums, kind of run by Tony Dungy, former coach, and there's lots of different organizations you can choose to kind of get involved in with a father, as a father, and just be willing to put it out there. You're not going to make everybody happy, but I'll find that you'll discover opportunities to get help.
Yeah. And David, I personally believe that the success of tomorrow's leaders begins with the success of today's families. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I think from having healthy a healthy home life encourages a healthy mental stability, which helps encourage a reciprocative type of value where you want to give back. And so that just kind of all perpetuates itself. And, so if you have a successful home life, you will have a successful future.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Please be sure to subscribe as well as providing a rating and review. Every week, I will interview a different leader and invite them to share with us their views and perspective on the relationship between leadership and family. Be sure to visit my website. It's www.alvinbonds2nd.com. That's ALVINBONDSII.com. Have a great day.